In 2015, a lab at Oxford tested 2 sheets of parchment that had been misfiled in an English library for almost 100 years. The carbon date came back so early, the team checked it twice. These pages may have been written while the man who first recited them was still alive. But the parchment is not even the strangest part. Because when conservators in Yemen aimed ultraviolet light at a different Quran, a second text rose up from underneath the first. Words someone scraped off the page more than 1,000 years ago. These are the 2 oldest Qurans on earth, and here's what is actually on them. Start with the library. The Cadbury Research Library at the University of Birmingham holds a collection of Middle Eastern manuscripts that a scholar named Alphonse Mangana assembled back in the 1920s. Most of it sat cataloged and untouched for decades. 2 leaves covered in the slanted, sparse letters of an early Arabic script called Hijazi had been bound together with a completely different manuscript and quietly mislabeled. On the page, you can still see decorated dividers between the chapters and little clustered dots marking the end of each verse. The text on these 2 leaves comes from chapters 18 through 20 of the Quran, the lettering still clearly legible after 14 centuries. A doctoral student named Alba Fadeli was the one who caught it. Working through the collection leaf by leaf, she realized those 2 pages did not belong with the rest. The handwriting was older, the style was wrong, so the library did the one thing that could actually settle it. They cut a sample the size of a fingernail and shipped it to a radiocarbon laboratory. Radiocarbon dating does not read scripture. It measures the decay of carbon inside the animal skin the parchment was made from, and from that it works out when that animal was alive. A machine, not a believer, produces the number. So when the result landed, nobody could brush it off as wishful thinking. The test ran at the Oxford Radiocarbon Accelerator Unit, one of the most trusted dating laboratories anywhere, on equipment that counts individual carbon atoms inside the sample. The parchment dated to between the years 568 and 645, with better than 95% confidence. That puts the skin beneath these verses at least 1,370 years old. Only a handful of early Qurans on the planet have ever been carbon tested at all, and one of the oldest of them had been sitting in a Birmingham drawer, filed under the wrong century, for the better part of 100 years. The staff understood exactly what they were holding, which is why they kept the result quiet for more than a year before they told the public. Here's where it gets contentious. The Prophet Muhammad is usually placed between roughly 570 and 632. Hold that against the parchment's range, and the windows overlap. Whoever inked these pages might have been breathing the same air he did. A few researchers pushed even further and asked whether the leaves came from one of the earliest official copies ever assembled. One Birmingham professor put it carefully, saying the fragments could take us back to within a few years of the founding of Islam itself. But the people who study this for a living are the first to pump the brakes. Carbon dating clocks when the animal died. The moment a pen actually touched that skin could come years later. And some experts spotted spelling habits in the Birmingham text that match a slightly later, standardized edition, which would nudge the writing forward in time. So the page is undeniably ancient. Pinning it to one exact decade is still a live fight. And that fight is a big part of why this scrap of skin matters at all. Quick thing before the next discovery. If you're the kind of person who'd rather inspect the evidence yourself than be told what to believe, that's the whole reason this channel exists. Hit subscribe, and the next investigation comes straight to you. Now, the Birmingham leaves are only half of this story. because the most revealing manuscript ever found wasn't sitting in a library at all. It was hidden inside the roof of a mosque. In 1972, builders were restoring the Great Mosque of Sana'a in Yemen, one of the oldest mosques standing anywhere on Earth. Working up near the ceiling, they broke through into a sealed gap between the roof and the rafters, and found it packed with old parchment and paper. Tens of thousands of fragments, water-stained, gnawed by rats, fused together into solid bricks of decayed manuscript. A German scholar named Gerd Puin was brought in to help rescue the pile, and what he found wasn't really a library. It was a graveyard. Worn-out copies of the Quran were never thrown in the bin, so for century after century, this hidden cavity in the roof had quietly swallowed them. The hoard turned out to be one of the most important manuscript finds in the entire history of Quranic study. Some researchers compared its weight to the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the surviving fragments are now conserved in a dedicated manuscript house in the Yemeni capital. And somewhere in that heap was a single sheet that refused to give up its secret. On the surface, it looked like a plain page of Quranic text. But parchment was costly, so scribes often scraped the old writing off a used sheet and wrote over it again, and this page had been recycled exactly that way. The first layer should have been lost for good. It wasn't. Scraping lifts off the visible ink, but a faint chemical shadow of the original stays locked in the fibers. Slide the sheet under an ultraviolet lamp, and that shadow burns back into view. Beneath the visible verses, an older erased layer of Quranic writing rose up out of the parchment, legible again after 13 centuries in the dark. Researchers in Germany and the United States spent years photographing and transcribing it. A scribe trying to save one sheet of skin had accidentally sealed an earlier version of the text beneath his own hand, then left it waiting 1,000 years for a lamp that could finally see through him. When that buried layer was itself carbon tested, it came back astonishingly early as well, old enough to stand alongside the Birmingham leaves, among the very first written records of the text. And that buried layer doesn't match the Quran people read today, not perfectly. The chapters underneath sit in a different order. Here and there, a word is written differently, one term swapped for another, a phrase arranged a different way. None of it rewrites the broad story, but it hands scholars something they almost never get to hold. The text caught in motion, at an early moment before it hardened into one fixed shape. And scholars don't agree on what that motion means. Some look at how close the two layers still are, and see a text that barely shifted across the centuries. Others look at the same differences and read the fingerprints of an early editing process. Both camps are squinting at the very same page. That is what pulls in the skeptics. There's no sermon anywhere in this. There's a carbon reading from an Oxford laboratory, a confidence range printed on a chart, an animal skin older than nearly any scripture still in use, and a Yemeni page glowing under ultraviolet light with a draft it kept hidden for over 1,000 years. The objects just sit on the table and make their own case. You can handle them, date them, argue about the decade, and serious people do exactly that every day. That is the entire appeal, and it's how a manuscript can settle what an argument never could. So that's what a laboratory found when it tested the words of the Quran. But there's a stranger case still, where the Quran didn't just preserve a text, it named a place. A lost city it calls Iram of the Pillars, a desert metropolis that historians had filed away as pure legend, the Arabian version of Atlantis. The consensus was simple: it never existed, until a satellite drifting over the empty sands of southern Arabia photographed faint lines beneath the dunes. old roads converging on a single spot, and sent archaeologists racing out into the desert to dig. That's the next investigation. The city the Quran said existed, that scientists called a myth, and it's on screen right now. Go find out what they pulled out of the sand.